All right, everyone, welcome back to the Gentreo podcast. I'm your host, as always, Jacob Murphy, and joining me today is Vin Bisceglia. Vin is an entrepreneur at heart and the chairman, co-founder, and executive chairman of Free Space Labs. He's also a family man and raised 3 boys here in Massachusetts, all of which I knew growing up. So, Vin, welcome to the show. Thanks for being on.
Hey, it's great to be here, Jake. Lots of fun and looking forward to this podcast.
So, just jumping right into your career in Free Space Labs, I mean, just the word space already sparks in my brain. Is it actually, it's working in space with satellites, correct?
That's correct. Free Space was founded 2 years ago with the mission of providing satellites in LEO, that's low Earth orbit, for applications in counter space applications for the Space Force. And as you may have heard, the U.S. government has established a 4th area of service in our military arena. And it's not just Army, Navy, Marines, but we're now the Space Force.
Yeah, the Space Force.
Yeah. So our company has been busy at work building satellites, Jake, the size of a toaster oven, with 6-foot wings for solar panels and some really unique sensors to identify other satellites in space.
So is that the primary purpose of them? Is it interacting with other satellites, or is there, obviously there's probably some military stuff that I'll never know what they're used for, but from what you can say, what is their primary purpose for a typical satellite?
You're right about that. There is a classified area of the business, but basically what we do is image other satellites in space. We find out who they are, what they're doing, and what their orbits are and their orbital dynamics, and try to derive the intention of that satellite. Also, you might have heard, Jake, that orbital debris is becoming a big problem.
Yeah.
So space junk moving at the speed of a bullet can pierce any satellite and render it useless if you collide with that. So we also track orbital debris as well and report that back down to analysts on the ground.
What is what's kind of the process for, I mean, I know you report it, but what's the process, or is there a process for dealing with space junk, like you said? Because I imagine it's tricky enough getting the satellites up there, but trying to bring them back down is probably a whole nother ball game.
Yeah, it's true. Up until recently, there hasn't been any rules or regulations associated with how long satellites can stay in orbit. Typically in LEO, low Earth orbit, which is roughly 100 miles above our heads, satellites will orbit the Earth at the speed of a bullet for about 5 years, and then they'll go through an orbital degradation and burn up in the atmosphere. It's elegant in that the space debris cleanses itself, but in higher orbits, that's not the case, where orbital debris can last for hundreds of years. So our mission is to image that debris, understand where it is, what orbit it is in, and then there are others in the sector that will actually collect it and deorbit some of the larger pieces of debris. So there's it's kind of like cleaning the ocean of plastics. It's same kind of challenge. It's big, it's vast, and we have to develop methodologies to keep it clear, keep the highways clear.
So that kind of, I imagine that's pretty tricky to figure out. But one thing about me is that I love the concepts of space, space movies, astronaut movies, things like that. So knowing that you work in that industry, I wanted to ask, what's one of the more tricky things in dealing, I know it's broad to say, but one of the more tricky things in dealing with something as complicated as space?
Yeah, it's very complicated and sophisticated, and you've heard the the old adage, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. Well, it does
Yeah,
when
in
it
this
comes
case, it does.
out. No, it really does take a rocket scientist. So it's very complex. The math is incredible, dealing with orbital regime and dynamics, etc. And there's a lot of smart people at MIT and other schools in the area that have figured this out. So I've been working with a lot of those brilliant people to help bring about a next generation, what we call Space 2.0 opportunities. And some of the biggest challenges are designing satellites that can operate in a very harsh environment.
Hmm.
It's we call it rad hardened, so radioactive hardened. So once you get beyond the Earth's atmosphere, you the radiation caused by the sun can degrade a computer chip very quickly unless it's protected and hardened. So that's the first thing you build into a satellite. That could be the size of a toaster oven, but it could cost millions of dollars because it has unique metals and technology to protect it from the sun. And also you run into the challenge of launches. Rockets blow up sometimes. So you could work for years to build a satellite, put it on the launch pad, and then see it go up in flames. And that's pretty deflating experience, but it happens from time to time. However, there's been a massive change in the last 3 or 4 years with companies like uh, SpaceX. They're building rockets now, the Falcon X rockets, and now Starship. And these are very, very functional, repeatable rockets that are flying on a weekly basis now,
Yeah, I
Jake.
remember
So
that was the whole big deal was reusable rockets, right?
that's right. Yeah, that's right. You've seen the rockets return back to the launch pad now. It's just almost like you're watching a science fiction movie, but it's real. And the brainiacs at SpaceX have figured this out, and Elon Musk and company are doing just a spectacular job of building this. But there's many other competitors too. Jeff Bezos
Hmm.
has Amazon Space. Blue Origin is another one of his companies. There's Rocket Lab, which is a great launch provider. Firefly, and several others that are building some great launch vehicles. Uh, and some are even 3D printing relativity space, for example, 3D printing rockets. So it's amazing the technology that's happening. But here we are. This is the 21st century. And now when you work in the space industry, you realize, hey, this is the future. I mean, it's
Yeah.
happening now. It's incredible.
So what do you think about the I know that there was some controversy over the concept of space tourism. Are you for or against space tourism since you're more closely knit to that industry? Do you
Yeah,
think do you think it's
very.
coming soon?
I think it is. I really do. I think it's coming soon. I think it's a big business. Um, and Richard Branson
Hmm.
uh, from Virgin Galactic has been driving that initiative in a big way, and so has Jeff Bezos with Blue Origin and his opportunity there to bring people to space, and not to mention SpaceX, because they have been launching satellites, rockets to the International Space Station, bringing astronauts there on a regular basis. And coming up soon, we're going back to the moon with Elon Musk and company at SpaceX on a mission called Artemis.
Hmm.
And before you were born, Jake, we landed humans on the moon back in the 1969. It began in
Yeah,
July.
I think I remember hearing something about that.
And you're gonna love this. It was a mission called Apollo.
Hmm.
Well, in Greek mythology, Apollo's sister, I think it's Greek or is it Roman? Um, is Artemis.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
what NASA named this set of missions is Artemis after Apollo's sister. So Artemis 3 will be landing humans back on the moon somewhere late 2025, early 26, depending on the schedules. But yeah, and it's going to be spectacular. So
Yeah, that'll be exciting to see. I remember back in fifth or fourth grade, I believe we did like a wax museum project in school where we had to research a significant person in history, and then we would put up almost like a wax museum where we would dress up as them, and then we had our posters with information, and then later give a presentation. And I did mine on Neil Armstrong, uh,
awesome.
which
What
his journey is obviously crazy just to think about. But
incredible. Really, what an amazing guy. And what an opportunity to be the first human to set foot on the moon. But there it is. Yeah.
yeah, that's probably the reason why I'm so obsessed with space movies these days. But
Yeah. Yeah. It's good
so
stuff.
take me back a little bit through your career. Were you always involved in companies that were in the space industry, I suppose?
No, actually, I started in mostly networking companies, high tech,
Hmm.
dealing with everything from the early cellular phone networks. I was building some of those networks uh, back to companies called Bell South Wireless, which became Sprint, which
Oh
I'm
yeah,
sure
yeah.
you've heard of. So, but we were building the early networks for Bell South Wireless in one of my startups. Another startup, we built fiber optic networks up and down the East Coast, which in a company called Neon Communications, which I took public and was the CEO of that company. And right now, we're talking over the neon fibers, the photons and electrons that we're seeing and hearing each other are flowing over the neon network because it's from Maine to Florida. We laid the fiber, and we have a lot of angry governors and mayors because we were digging up their cities for years.
Hmm.
But now it's we couldn't live without the internet, so that's a big
Exactly, yeah.
thing. And also, I did another uh, startup in video on demand applications, streaming video from uh, servers that sit on a cable infrastructure farm and then pitch to your set-top box. So if you wanted to watch Indiana Jones, you probably came over a video on demand server,
Hmm.
and I was in that business for many years. So I did a lot of fun things with products that people still use today, and I'm kind of proud of that. That we helped change the world in a big way and provided solutions. Now I figured, geez, I'll elevate my career to space
Yeah.
and take that game to orbit, and it's been a lot of fun. Much more difficult in space because you can't roll a truck out to a data center and fix a problem. You've got to launch it on a
Yeah, you
rocket. And,
gotta. It's a little more complex than that. Actually, I was reading your LinkedIn bio. Um, you talk about having built several successful liquidity events, IPOs, and you say at your core you're an entrepreneur, building, and I'll read quote for quote, building durable and successful companies that have achieved escape velocity is one of the most difficult and rewarding challenges in business. And I like the pun there, the escape velocity. I can tell you're definitely enjoying the work in the space industry. But I wanted to ask, having worked for a younger company like the company I'm at right now, Gentreo, where we're about five years into the business, and it's I have an understanding for what it's like having worked here on building a company kind of from the ground floor. But for our listeners, I kind of wanted to ask you about your experience in starting from a company that's a smaller idea or maybe just getting rooted, um, and building them up to these massively successful companies.
Mhm. Yeah, so it's interesting. So Gentreo is the question. Um, uh, what is Gentreo, and how do I view the opportunity there?
No, no, I mean I was just comparing that. I understand a little bit what it's like to work for a young company or a
Ah,
startup because Gentro is that. But
uh,
in your experience, being an entrepreneur, I'm sure you have plenty of companies that were in several different phases of their life. And what has your experience been like, starting from the very beginning and then, you know, taking the steps up to the point where you're selling them and moving on to the next task?
yeah, it's true. It's well, it's fascinating to take a company from the conceptual phase and
Hmm.
then drive it to market and commercialization. Very difficult, extremely difficult to do that. Um, I have also been part of companies that have been more established, and scaling them from point of product development to market is easier. So it's those early years, those are first conceptual to product development is very difficult. But if you surround yourself with the right people, capital, it can all gel beautifully. And I'm excited for Gentreo. I have looked at the company and its profile, and the company's doing all the right things, I think, to scale and drive it to the next level.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe down the line we'll have to add in products that involve estate planning from space, or what what
Yeah.
what documents do you need to consider when you're taking your first trip to the moon someday? Maybe we'll involve that. So one personal question that I had, just because you're obviously an established entrepreneur. I'm in my just starting years of what will hopefully be a successful entrepreneurial career. But all businesses, at least in my naive young mind, start from that idea or a recognition of a need. So I wanted to ask you, what are some of the signs that you see in maybe some of the businesses you've worked for, or just conceptually, what are some of the signs you see that tell you that this idea should either stay an idea, or yeah, this is worth pursuing as a potential business venture?
Yeah, good question. Therein lies the greatest challenge, I think, for an entrepreneur, right?
Mm-hmm.
To really do a self-assessment and come up with the right objective answer. So many entrepreneurs, Jake, they fall in love with their idea,
Mm-hmm.
and then even though they're getting perhaps feedback from the market to say, it's not as big as you think it is, or there's too much competition, etc. So I find some entrepreneurs fail because, again, they get emotional about what they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't objectively think about what's the competition doing, how big is this market, have I built a product suite that is easily accessible by the marketplace, and have I priced it right? And is my delivery and quality up to par? So I think you have to go through all of those iterations to be sure the answer is yes to each of those. And if it is, then I think you've got a rationale for scaling a business. But many entrepreneurs, again, have this lulled into a sense of complacency because it's their idea, and I'm going to make this work, even though I should probably pivot, change direction slightly because of this competitive issue or this cost issue, what have you. So I would say that to really scale a company and get it to achieve escape velocity is to be radically and openly objective about all of the business attributes that you see in front of you. And I've been doing this my whole life, Jake. So, that I've seen the movie over and over again,
Mm-hmm.
and I know what works and what doesn't work. But sometimes you don't get an objective answers to your questions from entrepreneurs because, again, they like to maybe sugarcoat it, or maybe they just believe it's much better than it really is. So another thing I like to do with a startup when I'm involved with it, do everything I can to kill it. And if I can't kill it, then it's a great idea, right?
There, yeah.
Right? Just say, well, I'm going to challenge the pricing. I'm going to challenge the product. I'm going to challenge the team, the organization, the market. This isn't going to work because of this, and then see what happens, right?
Yeah.
And then if you keep trying to kill it, and that bugger keeps moving around and it's still alive, you say, hey, that's a good idea, because it survived the scrutiny of a true filtering of the opportunity.
Yeah, I imagine, and again, as I said, I'm pretty early in the entrepreneurial space, but I imagine there's plenty of life lessons that get learned through the this high risk, high reward kind of industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking
You
of
were,
which, so
yeah.
I mentioned at the beginning that you're not only an entrepreneur at heart, but you're also a family man. And let me start by asking how are Eric, Matt, and David doing?
Oh, they're doing great. Thank you so much. They're Jake, they're thriving. Eric has three children. Maddie's got three children. So I'm now a grandfather six times over. And my youngest, Davey, got married this summer. So we're all excited for him. So yeah, they're all happy and engaged in the technology business. They followed me into this crazy lifestyle of trying to be an entrepreneur, and they're doing all great things. So I'm very excited for them. So they're doing well, and yeah, and Jake, I think that's probably one of the best, is the best thing about life. Really, is to be a parent. There's no doubt about it, and they make me proud every day, and so happy that we brought them into this world. So
make
good
sure
stuff.
make sure you tell them I said hi
I will.
when you go tell them about this great podcast
Yeah.
that I'm
Give,
sure
give,
they'll want to be on.
give your brothers a big hug for me as well.
I will. I will. They're doing pretty good too. Everything's crazy as always, getting started in the career, but
Yeah.
they're thriving too.
Cam and Coop.
Cam
Love
and
them.
Coop. That's right. So being a family man as well as a successful entrepreneur, I wanted to ask, as we just mentioned, there's plenty of lessons you can take away from the entrepreneurial. I mean, life in general, but the entrepreneurial area because it's so high risk and high reward. And I wanted to ask if there's any lessons that you learned that really stuck out that you've been able to apply to your daily life, not just as a um, an entrepreneur.
Yeah, you mean as it relates to estate planning and those type issues?
Not necessarily. I mean, it can. The topic of our of one topic that I want to cover during this podcast is, you know, the balance between career and family, and then how to have conversations with family members. But I think a lot of that starts from lessons that we learn throughout our lives, that we then get to pass down.
That's correct. And yeah, the work-life balance is very, very difficult for an entrepreneur, I found, because they typically, an entrepreneurial startup can be a 7 day a week
Hmm.
phenomenon, and it's long days, long nights. Case in point, I'll be on a phone call at 7:30 this evening with a potential customer from Australia,
Yeah.
because they're 14 and a half hours ahead of us. So in order to accommodate, you have to be willing to do those kind of things. So how does that impact, or does that interfere with your family life? It sure does. Yeah, but I think also being an entrepreneur, if you're the founder or co-founder, you're the boss, so you can make your schedules the way you see fit, and that's a good thing. So while you are challenged to maintain a balance between family and career, you have the capability of managing your schedule in a way. And another thing that I found just remarkable and is the way we now work, Jake, since COVID, right?
Hmm.
The capability to have this video call was always there, but we never did it because we would always default to a 3D meeting, right?
Hmm.
But since COVID, we're now accepting the fact that, hey, video calls are great. There's a balance. Maybe there's a hybrid effect here where we can get together in 3D, or just have a call like this if we don't have the time. So this has radically improved the efficiency and effectiveness of meetings, and I think it's going to have a major impact on GDP as we grow, and it's going to have a major positive impact on work-life balance.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring up COVID. I'm glad you did. I think people got almost a little taste of that. that ability to make your own schedule with the remote working, people really were able to, sometimes harder than others, but integrate work and life all together. You know, you could wake up and immediately be at your office, and then you have the ability to take a minute to go pick up the kids or go grocery shopping in the middle of the day, and then you come back and you continue working. And I found, for me personally, it actually led to longer hours for me, which, not in a bad way, but not having to commute, being able to kind of split up the day a little bit, take a break, and then just get right back to it. I found myself working,
Yeah,
later into the night without feeling that burnout that I feel a lot of people have. So it has been an interesting kind of phenomenon, what COVID has led us to in terms of how the whole business world operates and communicates and works with each other.
that's right. I agree. I agree. And there are many jobs that can't exist like this. You know,
Yeah,
if you're
yeah,
in the
that's absolutely true.
manufacturing business, you're assembling product, you've got to be there. And but there are other, businesses and job descriptions that uh, can be had just by two people getting together and having a conversation the way we are. And we should let the podcasters know that we're probably sitting maybe 600-700 yards away from each other right now in the neighborhood, right? So,
Well, I'm actually I've moved out of the neighborhood.
oh,
I thought about actually coming back and having that be a little inside joke that we were recording less than half a mile away from each other,
oh, I see.
but yeah, so we were in the same neighborhood for quite a while. If that was the case, I would have just brought my recording stuff over and
That's right.
moved all these rocket blueprints off your desk and set up a camera there. But
Fantastic.
so, like you were saying earlier, you had mentioned it, but Gentreo is, an estate planning focused tech company. We're disrupting that estate planning industry by adding the technology to it. So, I wanted to ask, what estate planning, was like when you were first discovering it, versus how, the potential that a company like Gentreo or any other companies like us have now brought to the table.
Yeah, it's what I would call a black box in the old days, and that means it's kind of a mysterious area where people don't really think about estate planning until they get older,
Hmm.
and then it becomes an issue. And then what do you do? So what I did, hired an attorney who specializes in estate planning. So they generated trusts and wills and other type documents for me. And they were sitting here in two big heavy binders in my office here. And when I need to refer to them, I go to them and sift through. Um, and many times they age and they sit there for years, and then you wonder, are they still appropriate? So I think it's an area that I think Gentreo is disrupting for all the right reasons, because it really is better served, accessible from a laptop, in the cloud, downloadable as necessary, and updated and upgraded on an as needed basis. Um, so yeah, I think it's a remarkable disruptive opportunity for Gentreo. I think it's a class of service that's definitely needed. In fact, truth be told, I was looking for one of my trusts today, and it took me a good hour to retrieve it, Jake, an hour to find the trust. Now, I guess if I had Gentreo and using that, I could have downloaded it or found it on the cloud immediately, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, the fact that you have one alone, though, puts you, an estate plan alone, puts you ahead of about 80% of the population. So you're
yeah.
still off to a good start. I imagine the boys, having, especially Davey, just getting married, he's probably dealing with some of that as well now.
Yeah, that's true. And it's interesting. I think maybe one of the challenges for Gentreo, and it's probably an easy one to surmount, is capturing the mind share of younger guys and girls like you, right, at your age and generation, to actually put a plan in place, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Because yeah, we all need it at any age, any life being what it is. That's there's a risk all around us, and we think we're invincible, but we're not, unfortunately. So having this set up is a great thing, and I think my generation, while they need it more directly, is sometimes not as literate in systems the way your generation is. So I think that's the challenge for my generation, the baby boomers, having them adopt. But certainly they need it. They all need it, and if they don't have a plan, they better get one.
Yeah, it's one of both the one of the great things and one of the really unfortunate things with a lot of our champions who we find, champions being people who are they just rave about what we do, is that they're all people who really care about estate planning, which a lot of people they just don't realize it's something you really should have by the time you're 18. But the
Yes.
reason that they are so crazy about it is because they've already been through the unfortunate things that can happen if you don't have it. So,
Yeah.
the key really is to get people to understand that life really does happen. So you want to be prepared. You want to plan ahead.
Yeah. And it's a complex matter. I mean, between the federal issues relative to estate tax, there are some very um, high thresholds that you have to hit in order to be taxable by the
Hmm.
feds. But state is different, state by state. So in the state of Massachusetts, it's a very aggressive estate tax. I think it's the first dollar over a million is taxable, and then the entire estate is, right?
Hmm.
And that scales up to 16%. So it can get very expensive from a tax perspective, a state tax perspective in Massachusetts if you pass away here. So, and I don't know if people recognize or know that. And a service like Gentreo would probably answer that question very quickly, right? And you'd be
Hmm.
able to say, "Oh my God, I'm,
Yeah,
I'm living in the wrong
education.
state."
Education is definitely half the battle most of the time. Is just knowing what applies to you, and
Yeah,
even with documents like a healthcare proxy, you know,
yeah,
getting it legalized, getting it notarized. Some states require an actual notarization. Others just a witness. So there's a lot of information that can change from state to state, and really just making sure people can easily have that educational material is it's been beyond helpful for a lot of people out there, which is good.
sure. Yeah, and also trusts. Do you handle trusts as well on the Gentreo platform?
So we do an irrevocable trust at the moment. Obviously, revocable trust there's a little more nitty gritty to it, but revocable trust or irrevocable trust we do handle right now.
Okay, great.
And there's about I think like something 40 something amounts of different kinds of trust that you can get, but at the moment the one that we do is the irrevocable.
Wow.
So, speaking on education, I'm sure you've talked to your boys over the years about some of the same things we're talking about right now and having a plan in place.
Hmm.
Have you found a balance in helping pave the way for them while also leaving some space for them to kind of figure it out on their own? Has there been any method for you there?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think the answer is no because I haven't really had that conversation with them. I have told them what my trust in a state looks like,
Hmm.
but no, they haven't. And I'm glad you raised that because I really should, right? Have that conversation with them as to putting a plan in place because they're all married now,
Hmm.
and the grandbabies are happening. So as far as life insurance is concerned, I have mentioned that to them to say, hey, now that you're a dad, you should start thinking of this. So, but to follow up on that, I really should do that. What's in place, and beyond that, though, beyond life insurance, I don't think it's top of mind for somebody at their age to be thinking about estate issues, wills,
Hmm.
and trusts.
It's funny, actually. I before I worked for Gentreo, I worked for an insurance firm selling health and life insurance, which is equally as important as having your estate plan in place. but
Hmm.
even more so, I think an area that people don't really like to talk about or dive into. And I'm trying to coin a term for this phenomenon that happens where something can have a great amount of importance to it, and for whatever reason, that makes the desire to get it done diminish. Where, getting an estate plan done or getting your insurance bought is something that people on paper would say is really important, you should just go do, but people just don't get to it,
Yeah.
which is interesting. So I want to coin a term for that occurrence that happens sometimes. But
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of our viewers I know struggle with even how to initiate these conversations. You could have a perfectly good family life and still have a bit of hesitation talking about it because it is important. And
Yeah.
it can be with estate planning a little morbid, because you talk about a will, that's talking about what's going to happen after you pass away, and that's an uncomfortable conversation to have. And I don't think there's really one solution as to how to approach these important conversations, but that's kind of what we wanted to talk about, is what are things that work when it comes to having a difficult conversation about, you know, things like getting an estate plan in order. And I know for me, talking with friends my age, sometimes just being, like you said, about dealing with a young business, just getting the blunt facts. Sometimes those work really well, where you just say, hey, there's what's the old saying? There's two certainties in life: taxes and dying. You
Yeah.
know,
That's right.
so why not be prepared for it? And we're hoping to provide that kind of tool to make that process so much easier.
That's a great point, and I never thought of it. But if Gentreo can pierce that veil of difficulty in having these conversations, that can justify a tremendous amount of opportunity for the company because you're right, they are uncomfortable conversations to have. My kids don't want to sit down at dinner and say, Dad, when you pass away, what's going to happen to the estate? That doesn't really happen. I usually initiate those conversations
Hmm.
and then they engage. But typically when they engage, it's, oh, you're going to live forever. Don't worry about it. And so, but, knowing, what the protocol is when somebody does pass away or is disabled, you know, where do you go, right? And having that somewhere where perhaps everybody has access to a certain file. Hey, if something happens to Dad, you know, go here, and it's sitting as a little widget on their laptop, and then click it open, and bang, there's everything they need.
Hmm.
What a stress reliever that would be, right? Because if something happens to your parents or somebody in the family, you're it's the biggest stress you can possibly have. So if Gentreo can relieve that stress, that's a massive opportunity there that is presented by Gentreo to the marketplace. So as we're talking, Jake, I'm starting to uncover more and more positive benefits for your company as we're going through this. But yeah, it's a like I said earlier when you asked the question, um, estate planning is a black box. It's an unknown.
Hmm.
Most people don't know where to go, where to get started. So what I did was I called an attorney and said, "Help me. I have no idea. What do I do?" And they've walked me through it. Now that can be extremely expensive too,
Hmm.
because it's not just one visit. It's dozens over the years. So yeah, so when you compare Gentreo to the physicality of a three-dimensional lawyer and going to that law office to have these discussions, um, that's an interesting competitive advantage.
Yeah, I'm gonna use that as a soundbite for sure. If the man who's gonna help put us on the moon a second time is saying that Gentreo is a good idea, then you listening at home should probably look into it.
I love it. You can quote me on that. Please
Yeah.
do. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
and I mean that's kind of the whole vision, is let's take this kind of black box, this unknown, let's break it down and show you don't need to be a lawyer to understand it. Let's make it easy, we always talk about how we're the TurboTax of estate planning. You go through, you sign in, and it's very, we'll hold your hand and get you through it, so you don't have to pay, you know, thousands of dollars for a lawyer. And hopefully, the goal for us is to never have that moment where you're like, oh no, what do we do now? Because something in life has happened. It's something is happening. I can go be with my family or deal with the emotions of it without having the additional stress of now I got to go to probate court or something like that. So,
Right.
because life, as I keep saying, life is going to happen. So might as well, be prepared for it.
I like it. Yeah. And if everybody, it's almost like, what do you do in an emergency? If you
Mm-hmm.
tell your family, hey, if the hurricane's going to hit, everybody gets into the basement and locks this door and let's gather there. Well, we don't really have an emergency procedure laid out. What happens if somebody passes away? What do I do? I mean,
Yeah,
uh,
people tend to learn it as they go through it, which can be it can be unfortunate and stressful.
very stressful, adding to an already incredibly stressful situation. So that's a great selling feature right there, where
Hmm.
it's it's almost a roadmap to for the day after, right? So the
Hmm.
first day somebody passes away. Well, what do you do the day after Gentreo?
Exactly,
Because
and that's why we have our feature called milestones, where as a milestone being getting married or having a kid or a divorce or whatever it may be, we give you a checklist of here's what you should do. Our motto, our unofficial motto, is leave a legacy, not a mess, and that's
that's great.
it's
Yeah,
exactly what we're trying to do. You don't want to leave something for someone to have to deal with. You want to leave something for people to look back on and reminisce fondly on, the life you've lived and the
yeah,
legacy you leave. But
that's fascinating. Great.
well, Vin, I'll let you go so you can get on that, get back to work. I'm putting
Thank you.
rockets
Yeah,
in.
yeah. About a half an hour, I'll be on the phone with the Australians.
Yeah,
So
you can
looking
tell them
forward
we
to it.
all said hi. But I want to thank you again for coming on. It's anytime you want to talk about space again, let me know.
Jake, it's been a pleasure as usual, and thanks so much. And big hugs to mom and dad too. I send them my love and the family too. So and keep up the great work. This is really enjoyable. You're a great interviewer, man.
Oh,
You got to think about getting your own show. Come on.
yeah, well, I gotta get out of my living room first, and then we'll figure out the rest from there. But
All
well,
right,
everyone, thanks for listening in to us. This has been a great episode. Vin, thanks again for being on, and we'll see you next time.
you got it. Thanks, Jake.